Mike, everyone's pretty much afraid, I think, to speak the truth about China and the Chinese. What do you think about the possibility that they're completely lying? That the idea that this DeepSeek was subsidized dramatically by the PRC, that the whole thing is really an effort to make it so that we ourselves have lost confidence and maybe stop our spending, including with what you're doing? And why do we always believe that the Chinese tell the truth? If I'm the Chinese, I put out something that made it so that you don't do what you're doing, that you stop your build out, that you look foolish, that we ask you tough questions because we think you don't know what you're doing. That's what the Chinese want.
Welcome to Investing in Intelligence, where we talk about artificial intelligence, company stocks, and trading. I'm James. Unfortunately, Kai could not jump in today. He's extremely ill. And I was on vacation yesterday, but we have no choice but to jump in and just cover this conspiracy. And to sum up the conspiracy in a few sentences, a crypto bro wrote a short report against Nvidia. Chamath from the All In podcast, a huge VC in the tech world, happened to retweet his short report. Chamath, as we know, is a huge investor in a competing company that wants to make something to replace NVIDIA GPUs, and the rest is history. There was a huge panic. All of this based on very bad information. And we'll be breaking apart each of the false narratives that went into this NASDAQ panic, this NVIDIA panic, and we'll be talking about why they are lies. So let's go ahead and just get some background. And rather than me giving it to you, I'd like to get it straight from the horse's mouth here. Bankless, which is a crypto podcast, had this crypto dude on there talking about his short report. Let's go ahead and hear straight from him who he is.
He plays in the markets as a value investor, one who dares to go short at times. Jeffrey released an article on his blog called The Short Case for Nvidia Stock, which has been echoing across the tech industry.
My friend, who's a hedge fund guy, asked me about it on Friday, and I just started writing about it. As I was explaining it to him, I realized, I should just write this up. And it's funny because it started out as, if I was forced to make the short case for Nvidia, here's what it would be. And by the time I had finished, I was like, this actually is a short. So why suddenly on Monday did everything crash? And I'd like to think it's because I'm pretty sure it is that I wrote this article in a way that sort of speaks to hedge fund managers, and so they can understand it. And I published it in the middle, of the night on Friday. And then it started taking off. And then it got shared by Chamath, who has, 1.8 million, right? And Chamath, and it's been viewed over 2 million times. Naval Ravikant has 2.5 million. And then the Y Combinator, Gary Tan, and the Y Combinator account, between them, they have millions of followers.
So there you see straight from the horse's mouth, the guy who actually wrote the short report that got picked up, how it got propagated, and who he is. He doesn't say right there who he is, but he's essentially a crypto investor. He's a developer too, so he's developed some crypto tools and some actually new crypto AI type tools that he's trying to promote. So we're going to go ahead and break down some of his false narratives against NVIDIA one by one and talk about why this was all a lie.
Decisions about CapEx come down to a couple people like Mark Zuckerberg, and there a lot of it is sort of gut feel, like Masayoshi Son, is this the good time to just push on the accelerator? And I think someone like Zuck has to take a step back and say, listen, I know my guys are really smart, but maybe, the answer is not necessarily to spend another $3 billion on NVIDIA chips that are very expensive. Literally, they're paying 40 grand for a GPU that's costing NVIDIA maybe $3,500 to make. So they're putting a lot of money in.
All right, so false narrative number one is that maybe they don't actually need all these chips. Look at the DeepSeek paper, look at DeepSeek, it's so efficient, it was trained with so little money. Why would they need more CapEx? Why would they need to buy more chips? So this is a false narrative because the current demand for chips and the current need to build these data centers has nothing to do with the kind of a large language model that DeepSeek is. Even the DeepSeek reasoning model has nothing to do with that. The reason that there's so much CapEx right now, the reason that we're building these data centers, the reason that there's so much demand for chips is for what's next. Okay, and what's next is a few things. First of all, agentic AI. We know OpenAI just released their first agent, which is 38% as good as a human being on tasks on a computer. Imagine what it'll be a year from now if we keep to build out. Now, the second thing is AGI, artificial general intelligence. which many of the experts believe that we're very close to, maybe a year away or less. And then the last one is ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. And we might be a little further away from that, but a lot of experts also believe that that is within reach. So the reason we need more GPUs is because we need to build more technology. It's not because we need to make the current models faster, better. We're almost out of data anyway, so that's not what's really going on. The CapEx is needed to build the future, not to just do the same kind of a thing that we're doing now, which is what DeepSeek just did.
DeepSeek stuff is all public, so they can look at the technical report. They can start making these changes themselves internally, theoretically. For at least for the next generation of models they're training.
So this is a false narrative that Jeffrey repeats multiple times. The narrative is essentially that, look, they were spending so much money on GPUs, but the Chinese just figured out how to do it more efficiently. So now Meta, OpenAI, they can learn from the Chinese and their techniques. So first of all, some of the techniques that DeepSeek used actually have been around and they've been published recently in papers. Some of the papers that they've been published in actually have researchers from Google writing in these papers. So it's not like these techniques aren't known to American AI frontier companies. They are known. They might not have been used or reported as been used, but the techniques are known. And to be honest, once again, the companies don't need to use these Chinese techniques for their own next model, because the next model is supposed to be something completely different that the Chinese have never even done before. The next models are more focused on agentic AI, which is an AI that can do things for you on your computer, and AGI and ASI. So we're moving in a new direction. We need more GPUs for that. We don't just need to make the current stuff that we already have continue or just redo the things we're doing. I don't even really understand that narrative.
You see this over and over again, that, with the one exception of a regulatory, like enforced monopoly. You do not have companies just get to print infinite profits without, with triple digit revenue growth, with 90% gross margins. You don't get to see, and without having everyone and their brother trying to figure out a way to beat them.
Right.
And that's what's happening. And so you look at, these companies, Cerebras and Grok with a Q, like these companies already have extremely compelling hardware that, largely does get around the Nvidia moat, for at least for inference.
So this is actually one of my favorite false narratives against Nvidia. The narrative is simply that, look at all these alternative chips. We've got Grok and Cerebras, which are building ultra-fast chips specifically for inference. And then, of course, we have the big competitors in Broadcom and Marvell making custom chips for companies like Google or Amazon. This is my favorite false narrative, because we can kind of look at where we are and where we're going and dismember it a bit. First of all, what's happening now? Is most of the inference happening on custom chips? Well, let's take Grok and Cerebras. They have no products on market. There is a website that you can go to and you can do a little sample query in Grok, but they're not being used by anyone in any significant way. They're like, if anything, a startup. Okay, so no use whatsoever of Grok and Cerebras in any significant way by any significant company. It's just not happening. For one, their chips are way too expensive. Now, let's talk about custom chips. So we know that Broadcom and Marvell are manufacturing custom ASICs that focus on performing inference, and Amazon, Google, Trainium, we know that some of these chips are out there and some of them are already being used for inference. But let's break it down. So first of all, what's being used for most of the inference? Is it these custom chips from Broadcom or Marvell? Actually, no. It's just older NVIDIA chips. So if you go to Replicate, for example, Replicate is a website that allows anyone to use models, usually open source AI models. You can go there and you can, for example, make an image if you want to. And it shows you the type of GPU that you're using when you perform that inference. And it's always an old NVIDIA GPU. It's usually if you're lucky, an H100, which is the previous generation, but normally it's an A100, which is 2 generations ago. So in reality, most inference is going to be performed by older NVIDIA chips. Usually the newest ones will be used for training models, and then the generation that you just retired from training goes straight into inference. And why? Why would that be used for inference rather than a custom chip or this ultra expensive Grok chip? Well, first of all, we're already using it, so we know how to use them. It's inside the CUDA domain, so it's an NVIDIA product. We're using NVIDIA products for everything else. We're using NVIDIA software for everything else. We're using PyTorch, so we might as well just continue using NVIDIA chips for inference. It's available, number two, and it's affordable. It's a retired NVIDIA chip, so it's going to be probably more affordable than making your own ASIC or buying the ultra expensive Grok chip. It just works, and that's why it's what people are currently doing. I don't see any reason to believe that things will suddenly change and everyone will give up the way that we're currently doing things for something that's more expensive than a retired NVIDIA GPU that's perfectly good at doing inference. So if you want to generate one image on Replicate using the NVIDIA GPUs that are the only thing that they offer to do inference with, then you're going to maybe spend 5 seconds waiting for your image. And you might wind up spending 15 seconds if you want to do a bulk 5, 6 images at the same time. But here's the thing. As these chips get older, guess what? The next generation Blackwell, or even the H100, once that retires and becomes available for cloud GPU hour usage, it'll be faster and faster. I don't see any need to spend more to abandon the ecosystem of NVIDIA and go to these new chips. It's not super necessary, and nobody really wants to do that.
Normal companies of the scale of NVIDIA tend to have extremely diversified revenue sources, whereas NVIDIA, all the high margin data center revenue is coming from 5 hyperscalers or something.
So this false narrative against NVIDIA is essentially stating that they've only got a few customers, all the revenue is coming from these few hyperscalers, and if those hyperscalers were to inevitably get all the GPUs that they need, they'll just stop buying. There will be no more demand. So NVIDIA on their conference calls has made it overwhelmingly clear they have massive backlog, massive demand. And if they could actually fill their backlog, if they could actually provide all the GPUs that these companies wanted, guess what? They've made it very clear there are plenty of other people who want to buy GPUs, including sovereign funds. We have other nations that want to buy GPUs to build national data centers. So there's an unlimited amount of GPU demand. If Meta and Microsoft and Amazon were to get everything that they needed, well, guess what? There's still Cloudflare. There's still AppLovin. There's still smaller US companies that want GPUs that can't get them. So that is a pretty obvious false narrative if you just listen to the NVIDIA earnings call.
Internally, PyTorch can then run that on CUDA and then run it on a GPU from NVIDIA very, very efficiently. But if you have an AMD driver, AMD GPU, it's not as easy to have your stuff run really, really fast, writing using PyTorch and stuff. And a lot of people were saying that it doesn't matter what anyone else does in terms of chips. If they don't have CUDA, it's game over. And there's two, I think, big assaults on that, which is that you're seeing the rise of these sort of even more high-level frameworks for expressing highly parallelized programming. And so you have this one, MLX is one. There's another one called Triton. And these are gaining, momentum. And then for that, it's CUDA is just one. They can't. You can write your stuff in MLX and then basically run it on an NVIDIA GPU really, really fast. But you could also make another, compilation target of MLX that could run on a completely different chip, like the one, that Amazon is making internally, the, Trainium chip. And so, and it's also very high level language. So maybe it makes, instead of writing in, targeting CUDA, maybe you should target MLX or Triton, and then you can also run it on using CUDA, but you could also run it using these other things, and then you're not locked into using the really expensive NVIDIA chips.
So this is a more interesting narrative. The idea is that you can use MLX to write whatever AI code you need to, whatever AI program you need to, and then MLX can not only run on an NVIDIA chip, but it can run on a different chip like an AMD one or a custom chip, for example. So this is a bit of a logical fallacy. If the NVIDIA is still the chip that you want to use anyways, then why even use MLX? Or even if you are using MLX, you're going to wind up running it on an NVIDIA chip anyways. So once again, if NVIDIA has a chip that performs better, or the chip is cheaper because you're doing inference on an older NVIDIA chip, whether or not you're using MLX, you're still using an NVIDIA chip. So this whole concept of, wow, now we have softwares that allow us to run AI models, to run AI programs, to do AI development on other types of chips, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be using other types of chips. You're going to use other types of chips because other types of chips are better or cheaper. But if NVIDIA is always one step ahead, which they always have been and probably will be for quite a while, I can't see that changing. And if for inference, the top chip is just an older NVIDIA GPU chip, well, you're going to run it on an NVIDIA chip anyways. So what's the point?
It's bad for Meta in that they have spent so many billions of dollars on GPUs, and they paying so much money to their team to like come up with the llama models and stuff like that. And then it sort of does make them look a little like foolish when these guys are able to beat them at their own game for, on a shoestring. So there's just this collection of sort of optimization tricks, add them all together, and they're not additive, right? They're multiplicative. Like each thing, if this thing doubles it and this one increases it by 40% and this one doubles it also, you're multiplying those multipliers, if you will. And that's how you can get this very big number, like 45 times, which, by the way, we don't really know. We don't know for sure. They could have lied about the number of GPU hours they use. One thing is clear, though, that they are charging 95% less for inference. So either they're losing money on that, or they really can do at least the inference part much cheaper than we can here in the West.
So now we really get to the meat and potatoes of the issue, which is DeepSeek. DeepSeek supposedly trained a model using a small amount of GPU hours. They did it with these little tricks that they invented. And wow, it was so unnecessary for us to spend all that money on GPUs. So this is the biggest lie and the biggest false narrative out of all of it. So first of all, with the amount of GPU hours that they say that they used to train the model, it would have been about 8,000 GPUs running continuously for a month. Now, 8,000, Jensen Huang says they are H800 GPUs that were legally provided to them. If that was the case, that's already $150 million. So you might say, well, you don't consider so yes, you do actually consider the cost of the GPUs into the cost of training. How else do we price or do we value the cost of a training run? There's no set way to determine the value of a training run, but it's not just the lunches that you buy for the employees working at the data center. You need to factor in the cost of the GPUs. And DeepSeek could not pay CoreWeave, or let's say their equivalent, which would be Alibaba AI Cloud. DeepSeek could not pay them to use their GPUs to do this training. This is, if it's really a frontier model from scratch training run, then you need to have a lot of GPUs together running continuously for a significant amount of time. You can't just use cloud GPUs for that. So this is actually their GPUs, in which case the cost of their GPUs should be considered part of the cost to train this model. Now, they paid at least $150 million for their GPUs, but in reality, probably closer to $250 million if you price those H800s at the fair price, which would be up to $70,000 per GPU. And they probably used even more GPUs than that 8,000. We just don't know because they didn't tell us. But we can do some basic math and figure out about how many GPUs it would have been needed. And already we're at a number over $125 million. So the $5 million number is so ridiculous, it's almost offensive. Now, here's the best part. They stole ChatGPT to train their model. Now, they're calling it something different, but really what they did was steal ChatGPT to train their model. So if you're starting with someone else's model, you didn't really train a model. You didn't really, if anything, this is a wrapper on a model. This is a model of a model. It's not a frontier model. It's a stolen model with some nice upgrades in there. Maybe you could say that. So how do we know that they stole ChatGPT? Because it's very well proven. We've got a lot of screenshots and a lot of episodes of AI investigators who went and asked DeepSeek, what model are you? And it answered, I'm ChatGPT. And in an article that I can put in the description, we had a researcher who went in and did a lot of other comparisons and saw very close similarities between ChatGPT and DeepSeek's models, things that are not similar to other models, like Meta's Llama, for example. Even if they had stolen Meta's open source Llama model and trained on top of that, it's still not fair. It's still not sanctioned. So they would have needed Meta's permission to train on top of Llama, but they didn't get that permission. We know that OpenAI's ChatGPT models are closed source, but they essentially ran either using an API or using other techniques. They ran inference with ChatGPT and stole those outputs to make their data. So if you consider that this is really just a remake of ChatGPT's model, we have to take ChatGPT's training costs into consideration for DeepSeek's model training costs. Okay, just to say that one more time, if they stole, which they did, ChatGPT, then ChatGPT's training cost is part of their training cost because it's not really a frontier trained model. So now we're in the billions of dollars that it costs to make DeepSeek. So that narrative is so patently false, it's unthinkable that anyone would sell a share of a stock based on it. But that's what happened on Monday, because the piece of the false narrative, the piece of this written with errors short report that really got picked up by CNBC and financial media was this concept of, oh, they trained a better model for $5 million. So first of all, I don't think it can be better than something you stole from if you didn't have permission to steal from it. And the people that you stole from probably already have something better coming out in a couple weeks. And then for the $5 million figure, we already discussed that. So this is the false narrative that was just like a delicious morsel that was picked up by the financial media. And it was such a lie that NVIDIA had no choice but to come back up today. So I could go over more false narratives. This short report was just riddled with every imaginable false narrative against NVIDIA. We had people like Gene Munster and Stacy Raskin come out, and I didn't see anything from Dan Ives, but we had the real sharp tech investors. And by the way, this Jeffrey guy is not an analyst. He's not a financial analyst. But Stacy Raskin is, and he's the number one tech financial analyst in the world. And he came out and very clearly said almost immediately, this panic is just that. It's a panic. Nothing changes. And that's what I guess I have to say too, is that absolutely nothing changes from this PSYOP, from this short report, from this Hindenburg style report that got picked up and snowballed. Nothing changes. Thankfully, we're still on track. The US is still on track to being the leader in AI. There are some concerning factors coming out of this, and I think this can be discussed in our next episode once Kai is back on. But essentially, my concerns coming out of this are how China was able to pull off this PSYOP and cause this big of a crash in the NASDAQ. And we're a tech economy, we're a service economy, and the NASDAQ is our stock exchange. To have this kind of a crash based on their PSYOP is concerning to me. And then obviously there are huge privacy concerns with using DeepSeek. We know that models are becoming more agentic, meaning you're going to allow models to take over your computer and do things on your computer. So if you start now with the Chinese model, that's just a large language model, at what point do you stop using the Chinese AI? Is it once they have your passwords and your usernames? So we don't want to let China start to control our computers at the point of the LLM. But we can get into more of that once Kai is back on. Thanks so much for watching this impromptu episode on the conspiracy of the DeepSeek Chinese model that killed American AI.